ungamuyelwa kulo mhlaba. Kusasenezindawo lezi kumele uzihambe, nezijebo ekumele uzithathe. Manje uzawugcwalisa wonke lo mhlaba negazi, noma uzosiza abadinga usizo nawe. Ubomi bakho abukabhalwa manje, kodwa buzawubhalwa.
Nice of them.
And we are live. Good job.
Okay. Okay, we are now live. So welcome to another episode of Bug Lab online talks. Today I'm a bit more excited because now we are having the Brotherhood games. We have Chris and Nick with us, and we'll be talking about their last game, Beautiful Desolation. But at the same time, we will sneak preview with their game in progress, which is Statis Bone Totem. Yeah, I just want to first of all say hi to Chris and Nick, because they are we are having this session. I mean, they are in Cape Town, we are in Istanbul, so it's great to make a bridge between those lovely cities. Hi guys.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Given. Hi, guys. Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. First of all, again, me and Ertuğrul will be moderating this session, and while you are telling about the adventure of Beautiful Desolation, let's say the postmortem of it, we will also ask some questions, and the audience could also write their questions at the live live Q&A channel. Plus, we will also take the questions from our Twitch channel at the same time. Yeah, I just want to make an intro about that. We got in touch with Nick and Chris almost 5 years ago, because I'm one of their fans and one of their supporters in Kickstarter. So my adventure with them started with their first game, Statis, with their debut game, Statis, which is really something. And they continued with Kane, and then Beautiful Desolation, and now another kind of an sequel, but not a sequel, another game which takes place in the Statis universe. Maybe we could say like that. So it's great to have a team which I really supported with my heart, and on Kickstarter, and also having you here. With this time online, and also having you talk about your games. I think it's a great opportunity for the Istanbul game scene, and because it's like you are kind of like a two-man army, and and as an indie team, you are making great games, and I really want to learn about the secrets of Brotherhood too at the same time. And I think let's start, because I have maybe a lot to tell, but let's start. Thank you.
Lovely, super. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the intro.
First, I'll introduce.
Yeah.
Yes. We'll pay you later. Thank you very much for inviting us. First of all, I'm on video. Chris's video is not working. It's a long story, but we'll both be chatting, and hopefully there's some great questions. Swing them in the Q&A live chat there, and we'll happily answer anything that we can. So first of all, we're going to start at the very beginning. We'll just give a brief overview of who we are and how we got to the point making this ridiculously massive adventure game. So my name is Nick, and my brother is Chris. If you didn't get that from the name of the company, the Brotherhood. We live at the tip of Africa, in Cape Town, and Chris and I have been working together for the better part of 2 decades now. In the early 2000s, we started a graphic design business. It was an architectural company that specialized in 3D illustration for property developments and that sort of thing. And it's a long story how we got involved in that, but suffice to say, after 15 odd years of that, we were really burnt out. The property industry is very difficult, as you can imagine. And we were at a point in our careers where we either needed to continue to expand our business, where at that point we just become managers of other people, and we're doing absolutely nothing creative, or we could do something totally different. And at around about this time, Chris decided to develop a video game called Statis in his part-time. And I'll let Chris elaborate a bit on that, on how Statis came to be. Statis being the first game that we collaborated on.
So when we were working at our company, Burn, we did a lot of work in architectural illustration. And before we started Burn, I really wanted to do film production design. That's always sort of been my passion. I wanted to build miniature models and work in sort of big science fiction movies. So I've always had a side project that I went along with my sort of like main work. And one of the side projects that I started was an adventure game called Stasis. And actually, I got the name from, I was watching Event Horizon, and there's one scene where they mentioned that these people were stuck in, they say stasis. And I needed a name for a directory, and that was just the first word that I heard, and I typed it out. And then from there, I essentially started to build the idea of this sort of science fiction world around a ghost ship that was floating through space. And I decided I've always loved adventure games. Initially, I did want to do it as a short film, but sort of, time and budgets kind of got the best of me. So I thought, let me do a cool story. I love adventure games, so let me see if I can make at least one room. I downloaded a piece of software called Visionaire, which allows you to make I'm not a programmer, so I'm an artist. I'm not a technical person, as the previous conversation will attest to. I'm trying to get the camera set up. This program is basically allows a sort of like a WYSIWYG editor that would allow an artist to actually create sort of very, very if-then-but programming strings. So I put my artwork into it and sort of like posted some stuff online on a small forum, and people started to actually like what I did. And it sort of snowballed out from there. I think I worked on it in my spare time for about 3 years while we ran Burn. And then I had my mini burnout at Burn. And around this time, the Double Fine Adventure Kickstarter had just come up, and Kickstarter was sort of blowing up. And I had this idea that if we were going to do something different and still retain our creative freedom, something to do would be to maybe see if we can turn this little side project that I had into something bigger. So I went to Nick and I said, maybe we should give this a try. And we ran the Kickstarter, and it was successful. I think we did $140,000, which it does sound like a massive amount of money, but in sort of like production levels, the majority of indie game production tends to go towards the main developer's salary. But But with the budget that we had, we essentially put everything into the game for the 2-year development cycle I think we went through. And that meant that Nick had to work at Burn and essentially support me and also work as a producer on the game for the 2-year development cycle of it. And then the game was launched. I won't go into too much detail about the sort of like nitty gritty of the development of it, but because there's a lot of things online.
That's for the next talk.
Yes, yeah, that'll be the next talk we do. And then, yeah, we released Stasis, and it did well enough that it let us say, like, maybe making games is something that we can actually do. So we sort of, it was a viable experiment for us. And to go from, I mean, I think at the height of Burn, we had, I think, 12 people working for us. It was a very, very large artistic company. And then to literally go from that and a day later sort of close down to just Nick and I working on it. So what we decided to do was do a project to sort of test how we actually work together. And that was Kane. And we worked on Kane for a year. And a lot of that was to sort of check out our pipeline, check how we actually work together. And I'm sure Nick can go into a little bit more about the tech behind Kane and what we actually want to develop with Kane.
So at this point, Chris had developed Stasis by himself.
Maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to interrupt about one thing. Yeah. I also follow Chris and also on Twitter, and Chris is such a big Alien fan. Yes, and it's very obvious that you are. Yeah, I mean the influence is very obvious, but it's. I think you really pull all those influences from like movies like Event Horizon, like Alien, and all those universe, and put in a game, which is because in a way maybe we had some. Sorry, my cat interrupted me this time. So maybe, yeah. So maybe we have those kind of games, but I guess it's the first time which really transferred that atmosphere from the movies to a game. So I think the Statis was in that sense very successful by really transferring that atmosphere, that isolation, that, let's say, that elements from that universe. So I think in that sense it's a very good a collage of many different elements. So I just want to also emphasize that.
Yeah, I think that because Chris.
Okay, Nick can.
Sorry, I think because we have there's a slight delay, Chris. Because we have an architectural background, Chris sort of stuck to what he knew, and that was the architectural side. So, obviously he kept the project really simple. There's a couple of characters, but he stuck to what he knew. He knew architecture. He knew how to do environments. He knew how to build scenes and that sort of thing. And I think that there's a lot has to be said about working to your limitations, but I think the limitations also drove the technology and drove the look and feel of the game, because obviously it was just one guy doing it. Chris pretty much did Stasis by himself. So I mean, in terms of game content, that was 100% by himself. I think
something with Stasis is that the atmosphere of Alien and that sort of lends itself to a much slower game. Whereas a lot of games that try to create the atmosphere of Alien, they tend to go for Aliens, which is the big action set pieces. And I think that, as Nick said, like sort of going to our strengths of environmental design was something that we really tried to lean into. It's something we've done with all of our games.
Yeah, I think, and also because we chose an isometric vantage point, which isn't the easiest view to tell a story from. I mean, you're set back, you're not connected to the character. Obviously, if you can see through the character's eyes, you can convey a lot more emotion. And that's obviously why the modern games are, modern adventure games tell their stories through the first-person camera, because you can experience it with the player, where we have a disconnect to the player. although we were able to show the environment as a character beyond just the character as a character. So the strengths show in the environment, and maybe the weaknesses show in the character. But keeping that in mind, Chris worked a lot on the sound design. He worked with the musicians, etc., to really push the areas that we knew that we could excel in. And I think that's one of the reasons that Statis has resonated with people. I mean, it's quite crazy. It still sells today. Every day people buy a game that's like 5 years, 6 years old. It's old, clunky. It's 720p. I still have to do support on it every week. Someone has an issue and we sort it out. But it's people still play it, and we get mails every other day. We get an email from someone saying how much they loved the game, and I think it was immensely successful in that regard. Christopher?
Yeah, and it really was sort of like a love letter just to all of those things that I love about horror, and the things that I grew up with. I mean, Alien, I still think is probably the greatest movie ever made. I don't think it's actually been topped. I think it's set the benchmark for the genre of space horror, and it's set it so high that nothing has actually come even close to it. And the idea was just to be able to take a tiny portion of that and turn it into a game. And I see the limitations in Stasis, and I see all the things that I would have loved to have done better. But it's a game. It's a very personal project for me, and I'm immensely proud of the fact that we actually got it out and finished it with our sort of tiny resources we had to actually put into it.
And maybe also with the isometric perspective, maybe just like you said, we can't internalize with the character that much, but in a way, because of the setting, because of the plot, this time we want to help the character. So as a player, we want to first of all survive. We want to survive, and we also want her to know about what's going on. It's a different kind of let's say it's a different kind of connection with the player, I suppose.
Yeah,
and so it's a different way to tell a story. Now that obviously coming from the success of Stasis, now Chris and I were like, okay, what are we going to do? You know, we had this game, it reviewed really well, it won Adventure Game of the Year. We now need to do something together. Now at this point in time, Chris and I had not worked together. We'd worked together in a professional capacity in a different context, but we hadn't worked on a game. I had done some production on Stasis, just sort of play testing, pushing the game in a certain direction just to get it finished and made, and dealing with all the periphery around game development. But Chris and I had never worked on a game directly, and so that's where Kane came from. We thought let's take a year, and we'll work on a game. We'll sit in the same office for a year next to each other at a desk and see what in 9 to 12 months, what can we do together, and is this viable? I mean, I programmed Kane, but I've been programming for a long time, but never in a professional capacity. I've just been normally write business tools and stuff for us to work with in our office, and little things like that, and web development, but nothing game related. So Chris and I hunkered down in our office, and we came up with a game also set in the Stasis universe, a different character, a very simple story, and we decided that we'd actually release it for free, and we then use that to promote our next game, which is Beautiful Desolation, which is what we will talk about, which is the main thrust of this talk. So, Chris, would you like to discuss A Beautiful Desolation?
Yeah. By the way, I think that's a very indie approach to give a game free. Which is not a very small game. I played it. It's also a great game, Kane. To give a game free to promote the next game, I think, which is also a very indie approach.
Yeah, Chris and I are always trying to think of out of the box solutions to market our game, because at that point, it was quite hard to get recognized. But these days, it's so hard. I really feel for new indies who are coming through who don't have an audience, because we even feel it all the time. It's so people have a 1 or 2 week attention span, and they move on to the next thing. So you have to constantly keep people engaged. Very difficult. So, we'll talk a bit about our newest game later, but we've done a similar thing with the launch of the game, announcement of the game. We've released a demo, which is the first part of the game that people can play for free. We have to constantly think out of the box to promote it, because we obviously don't have AAA budgets. I mean, our budget for the game is probably their food budget for a year. It's incomparable to what they do. But I think sometimes the limitations that we work to are to our advantage. We have to use guerrilla marketing to make things happen. Chris does these promotional isometric images. We're active on a lot of forums and stuff. We do a lot of things that probably the AAA studios don't need to do, because they can just rely on funds, money, ad spend to achieve the same thing. Yeah. Christopher?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that I do want to start doing more, is do sort of like devlogs and kind of try to promote our stuff on YouTube and more social media. I'm just very bad at social media in general. Like, I'm allergic to Twitter. I don't really get it. We've been meaning to start our own Discord channel, but we can imagine how well I would do with that.
We have set it up. Currently, there's just Chris and myself in there. We haven't invited anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you said,
by the way, just before you move on to the beautiful Desolation, I just want to say that there's a making of Statis on YouTube, on the Brotherhood games channel. So they already covered all those influences which the game is like feeding from. So I really advise you to check that out. Maybe Volkan, you can find that link and
putting on whiteboard now
on the whiteboard, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there's only 2 episodes done on that so far. So the first episode essentially covers of our devlog series. Essentially covers what we spoke about when we first looked at starting our company and the issues that we actually went through, going up to the Kickstarter. And then the Stasis one is sort of the first half of development. And then I will be doing another episode following. I've actually got it all edited. I just need to put it together and upload it. And that'll sort of continue with the development, the post-mortem of Stasis. And then something that's going to be quite interesting after that is I want to do a selection of sort of after, at the end of Desolation, we had a little bit of time and to sort of think about the next games we're going to do. And we'll discuss that definitely at the end of this talk. But I'm going to put together something that's got some of our footage from our early prototypes. Essentially what I like to do is I do virtual game mock-ups of the games that we're going to be doing. So I use After Effects and 3D Studio, and I make sort of animated screenshots, and that's how I pitch my ideas to Nick. And then Nick will even pitch his ideas to me, and we'll sort of come together with some sort of artistic benchmark of the type of game that we're trying to make. And I'll sort of show a couple of videos of those previous, we call them prototypes, of our little prototype videos and stuff that we do. And I do definitely want to continue the devlog series, going into some background on Bone Totem as we actually push it through. I just need I've actually just moved house, so my place is a bit of a mess, but I've got a setup that's going to be ready here that I can quickly do recording. And I'd love to do sort of like fortnightly video uploads to our YouTube channel. So there is definitely
he's leaving game development and becoming a YouTuber. Apparently.
I'm becoming an influencer, guys. I'm becoming an influencer.
You can all sim for Chris. I mean, after Kane, and that we did some other work on Wasteland 3, and we've done a lot of other concept stuff for other games. A lot of the stuff we can't talk about, but we have branched out into other, well, not just our own games and that, but after we released Statis, we did Kane, and then we decided we were going to produce another game. Now, we then came up with this concept of a beautiful Desolation, and we released Kane at the same time during the Kickstarter. We ran a Kickstarter for that, and that was successful. And so I think let's intro Beautiful Desolation, bro, and let's just talk about what we were trying to do, or what it is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know you guys, you played the trailer before, so I'm going to assume that everybody has a rough idea of what Beautiful Desolation is. But when we were discussing the next game that we wanted to do, we definitely wanted to make another adventure game. I think that for indies, it's important to, if you've got a niche and if you've started to build an audience, after you've worked on a game for a while, you tend to immediately want to go into do like another genre and do something else. But I think that if you're looking at this as a long-term business, I think you have to sort of like find your niche, develop it, and be able to sort of take your audience from your one game into your next. And that was definitely something that we wanted to do. So our next game was going to be an adventure game. We had a couple of ideas of the world that we wanted to do. Sort of my love of post-apocalyptic influences, and Mad Max, and obviously coming off of getting to work with Brian and them on Wasteland, we definitely wanted to do something in the post-apocalyptic genre. As to what that was, we had a couple of ideas, and eventually we settled down on something as unique as we could make it, which was going to be a post-apocalyptic world set in South Africa. And all of our games generally it's a very small personal story set across at the background of a very vast sort of like world that we actually develop on. And all of our stories, they tend to revolve around family members, around well, Nick and I being brothers, that was sort of our obvious step. But even if you look at Mark in Stasis, that was, John in Stasis, that was sort of like, a man and his family. Kane is about Hadley, who's looking at starting a family and what that actually means to her. And even our next game, Bone Totem, sort of revolves around a husband and wife and them dealing with the loss of their child. So the core of all of our stories tends to go around very, very small personal stories of ordinary people dropped into these mass extraordinary worlds. And something was definitely important to us was having a bit of our home being South Africa and being Africa, and trying to take that into a game, into a story moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's important. It sounds so obvious. Authors, when they write a book, people say write what you know. So I think it's very easy for game developers to kind of spin off onto these wild stories of fantasy and that are impossible, and they become very disconnected. Whereas I think that if you want to stay grounded and actually finish a game and actually finish a project and a product that within a reasonable amount of time, Desolation took us 3 years, but it's an immense game. The reason is that we kind of grounded the story much smaller than, we could have gone something huge and epic and a hero's journey and that sort of thing, but we never would have finished the game. And the amount of money that we would have spent, we'd never be able to recoup that. So, like Chris said, we like a small story set against a vast background, like a fish out of water story. Always the easiest to tell. And for us personally, family is important. So we always tell our stories are always based around relationships and relationship issues, and that's where we start. That's a starting seed that we started growing for Beautiful Desolation. Can
I ask that? So the story opens with like two brothers. I guess maybe they also have some features from you, because you're also two brothers.
Yeah, I think I think we don't necessarily. I mean, obviously, they have a lot of trauma in their lives that they had to deal with, and people. Chris and I had a great childhood. We never had a traumatic childhood or anything, so it's not that's not based on personal experience. But the core, I think, emotive feelings in the relationship, we're both able to relate to. So we're not writing something that is totally alien and foreign to us that we have to then go and spend endless hours researching, and that it's something that we could comprehend and we could understand and we could relate to. And I think that's important. It doesn't necessarily have to be a true set of events or something that happened to you, but it has to be something that you can relate to, especially because we're telling a real world story, real world in inverted commas, a relationship story. The characters should react to some degree based on reality. I think that's important. Chris, did you have anything to say on that?
I mean, I even think when we were first sort of coming up with the ideas of Beautiful Desolation, Nick and I, we recently moved to Cape Town from Johannesburg. And it was sort of my first time of living close to the beach, because Joburg is a massive city space, and Cape Town is very sort of like ocean oriented and very sort of much closer to nature than I think I've been in a very long time. And a lot of our early discussions were Nick and I walking on the beach with Nick's dog. And I think that the idea of these sort of two brothers going on the adventure with their dog was something that the core of that story just seemed very obvious, just from our sort of like relationship, and it seemed like something that we could sort of develop on quite easily. And I think, I mean, I sort of write quite a bit of the dialogue in our games, and I think that I'm not enough of an imaginative writer to write the dialogue from somebody else's point of view. So I think that my characters do tend to be a little bit self-inserty, and I think it's important because it keeps you like I can say the conversations out loud that we actually have in the game, and I feel that they're natural. I feel that they flow nicely. Whereas I don't know what the general of an alien army who's trying to motivate his troops, I don't know what that would sound like. But give me a conversation of two brothers talking about an ex-girlfriend, I can sort of write that. And I think that was an important part of being able to tell the story, and also making certain that the game itself didn't sort of, even if it veered off into these massive fantastical elements, which if anybody's played Beautiful Desolation, the game gets very weird very quickly. But we still always had this grounded core of the brothers' relationship. And a lot of my favorite movies and my favorite stories are about that. If you look at even Ripley from Alien, you know, in Aliens, Ripley's very much a mother-daughter story. And that's, no matter what you can always come down to that sort of core of the character. And I think as long as you've got that core of that character, it makes the writing way easier. And it also almost lets you push your boundaries of your story as far as you want, because you've always got this anchor to actually come back to.
And yeah, I guess it's a very like a solid working concept to focus maybe on yourself and also the environment you are living in, right? Because sometimes we are looking for, let's say, very different ideas, like very far away, but actually the ideas are probably just are nearby, like probably in our lives. But I guess the creative process is just to turning them into metaphors, or into some making versions of them, probably.
Yes, no, exactly. 100%. I mean, you know, we also in telling a story, we had a character-driven story, but we also, I think what was also really important was the setting of the story. We wanted to set the game somewhere that I mean, we literally worked on post-apocalyptic games that other people have developed. We didn't want to just go and rehash something that everyone's seen before. We thought, why not set it right here? No one's really done anything here that's of any interest. We in terms of an adventure game. So we thought, you know, let's set it right here in Cape Town, but an undetermined amount of time in the future. So once again, we spoke from what we know. So I won't go into too many spoilers in the game, but the game takes place from the late 70s to early or mid 80s, and then into the far future. But specifically, it's grounded. The story, it's grounded around the brothers' relationship, but it's also grounded in a story set in South Africa. So it wouldn't be right to ignore the past of South Africa, and we try to bring that a little bit into the story. So the robots in our story that dominate the future are they're very fascistic, which is anchored to the apartheid government. I mean, Chris and I were born. We were born at the end of apartheid. We sort of don't really have much memories of that, but obviously we've heard stories, and our parents grew up in it, so we can understand the stories of what happened. South Africa was essentially a police state. So it was an interesting place to set the story. The environment was interesting, but the history was also interesting, and I think that's also it's really important, And I think, especially as indies, we have to do something different than everybody else is doing. I mean, even if you look on Steam now, there's hundreds of post-apocalyptic games set in the United States in an atomic wasteland, and people have been doing this for like 30 years now, you just becomes grey. So even Wasteland, the new Wasteland, they set it in a snowy environment just to get away from that desert kind of feel that everybody's doing. So I think the environments, the history, and that all set apart. Chris, did you want to talk a little bit about Don and his background and how that played into the story as well?
Yeah, so a sort of a little known or a very rarely discussed part of South Africa's history was we had our own version of the Vietnam War, which was essentially in South African history it's called the Border War, and it was a war that the government for a long time actually denied we were even involved in, and a lot of it sort of damaged the psyche of an entire generation of our country, because we had, as Nick said, a very nationalistic government. We had conscription, so you didn't have a choice. You had to join the armed services. And when you joined the armed services, you were either put into the police or you were put into the army, and then you would ship you off to the border. And it was a brutal war that sort of before PTSD was even known, they were sort of bringing back these men that had done these horrific things and they'd be put in these horrific situations and expecting them to just go back into normal everyday life. I think it did a massive amount of damage to, as I said, a large generation of South Africans. And it's something that we wanted to sort of like definitely recognize in our game. And in fact, the voice actor for Don, he was actually involved in the border war. He was actually at the border. So we did rely on him to sort of take our writing and just make sure that we were being sensitive to the people that went through what these people actually went through. And it was to sort of take that idea of healing and run that through our character, Don, and his relationship with his brother. So he's got his own issues and his own demons that he's actually trying to go through that go beyond just, this is my relationship with my brother and it's not good. Like there's an entire other aspect to him. And of course that then ties into our sort of like future setting where we actually have this constant war that's actually going on, and how he actually deals with this environment that he's been put into.
Yeah, I can maybe I guess especially the people in this talk will really understand it, because we are also we are living in Turkey, and we are like always in between Europe and Middle East, and Middle East always been unfortunately like including a lot of problems, a lot of tragedy and wars going on, like civil wars or wars going on. So in that sense, I mean, having something local and then making it global is very, I think, very powerful. And finding those stories really like in your, let's say, landscape is I think very valuable. And I'm sure that I guess you made a lot of research about the tribes, because I guess each tribe is it represents something in the, let's say, maybe the current state, or I don't know. Did you do any research about the tribes in Africa?
Chris, you want to take that one, bro?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually quite strange. We recently had a conversation about this with another streamer, and South Africa is very much a melting pot. We have a massive amounts of languages, a massive amount of different cultures in our country, and everybody has sort of their own unique views and their own unique customs, and somehow this all sort of works together. And something that we definitely wanted to do when we put the game together, we put the story together, was draw on our experience of living in this world that's very much. If anyone's ever been to South Africa, they can probably see how strange it can actually be to have so many people, so many different cultures actually living together. So I think we didn't want to sort of do a direct look at, say, take the Khoisan or the Zulu and kind of like push that into our own races. So we wanted to do something that was very unique and something that sort of had the idea in the core of these very different people living together, and that maybe had certain touchstones to our current culture, but wasn't a direct sort of continuation of them. Also, because I think that we have to be very sensitive to the idea of somebody's culture. And I think making a caricature of it in a computer game can be, even if you're doing it from a well-meaning place, it can actually it can be quite damaging, and it's something that we didn't want to do. But we want to sort of celebrate the art and celebrate the unique look that Africa actually has, and the unique spaces that we actually have access to. So something that we definitely tried to do was make sure that the characters in our world are very diverse and have a very wide range of accents and looks and the way they live together.
And just as we gave Mark and Don a complicated relationship as to why they were doing what they were doing, they weren't just two archetypal characters who were moving through a story. They had a relationship. We did the same thing with each of the various tribal groups in the game. We looked at what they want to achieve, where they've come from, why they're in the predicament, where their past, present, and future, and we mapped that out for each of the groups. We wrote a couple of pages for each one. We looked at a wide cross section of tribes across Africa and historically, and that looked at the Maasai, looked at what their gods were, and we sort of came up with this hodgepodge of ideas. But I think it's also important to, again, just because, if I say to someone, just come up with like a fantasy, a space alien, whatever, or alien group, they'll come up with something fantastical, but it won't be relatable. It won't. You still have to do sort of the Star Trek idea where humans are going to play the game and they're able to relate. So you have to kind of ground that fantasy in some kind of reality. I think that's very important for putting together the narrative of the game, because else you'll just go on a crazy tangent and people won't be able to relate to the characters. So, Chris, do you want to carry on from that?
And it's actually quite interesting because Nick has a very sort of like a much darker sense of humor than I do, and I've got all my books and I do all my research, and then Nick will come up with some crazy idea, and then I'll sort of have to go and kind of like whittle it down and again go and make certain that it's grounded in the history in the world. And the world building is something that I really enjoy doing, and it was one of the main reasons why we wanted to do a sort of a more open world game in this sort of massive world that we have, was that I could write 100 years of history. And I literally have pages and pages. And I mean, I developed writing systems for each of the different tribes and different languages that they had. And each of them has their own sort of gods and their own reasons, as Nick said, why they are in the part of the world that they're actually in. I might have gone a bit too far with a lot of those things because I don't think anybody.
And
so, if you saw my notes, you probably think I was a crazy person.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because it's not. I mean, the world building is not just about the visual part, the architecture part, but also just like you mentioned, like what's going on with those tribes, their relation, their stories, because in a way all those, especially the relations part, will in a way, because will also help the game plot, will also help the game puzzles, because I think there's a very good balance of I mean, in terms of relations about the tribes, there's a very good balance in a way. Like when you help one tribe, like you follow a certain path, but if you don't, then maybe the other tribe could be upset. So in a way, as the player, you have to make it. You have to give a decision, and that conflict is also really contributes to the game, to the game feel.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that was, Stasis and Kane were both very linear. They were linear games. They told a very linear story, and we drove the character and the player where they needed to go. And although there was some puzzle solving to progress to the next area of the game, it was linear. Whereas Beautiful Desolation was a linear story but wrapped in an open world. I think it is difficult to tell a story like that, and it obviously took us about a year and a half or so just to actually work out how to actually tell this big story and make it interesting. I think the closest game that's come close to that, which is a definite inspiration for us, and if everyone here hasn't played it, I suggest you go and grab it. It's free. You can grab it for free online. It's called Star Control 2, which is the finest, in my opinion, the finest adventure game ever made. Even Mass Effect is based on Star Control. It's pretty much the same game in 3D. And Star Control came out in '92 or so. And Chris and I grew up with that game, and that's where we wanted to take it. So it's lots of these little. It's a space game. Obviously, you fly around and you deal with all the different little alien races, and they each have their history and wants and needs. And you as you run this linear story through there. But you want to make it as open, feel as open as possible, and that's definitely where we wanted to take this the story. But obviously, we had to work within our limitations. Once again, there's just two of us, so we had to kind of temper where we wanted to take it. So we thought we'll do a linear story in an open world, and we will then use some license from like Fallout, where they had multiple endings, that sort of thing. Chris, do you want to talk about the multiple endings and why we did that?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually it's something that I think adventure game developers have been struggling with recently, and people that work on very linear games is with the advent of streaming and with the advent of sort of Twitch and that, you can almost get the experience of a linear game by watching somebody else play it. I watch a lot of Let's Plays. It's usually while I work, I've got one on, and I feel like I've had that experience of actually playing those games without having to actually play it. So a challenge that we had was how do we make a game that Let's Players and streamers can play, that's an adventure game that somebody will say, well, maybe I want to give that a try. And definitely something we came up with was to have this sort of like choice and consequence system where in the game, at several points, you are given these very large decisions to make. And the idea was sort of that even if somebody watches somebody else play, that they might want to tell their own story and might come out in a slightly different way. And even that with our ending. So I don't know how many endings the game has. I think it's 5 main endings, and then I think we have it's something like 40 different variations that can actually happen depending on the different choices that you actually make. And a big part of that was to sort of have the idea that even though it's an adventure game and it's a linear story, everybody playing the game will still have their own unique experience as they actually go through. And even with the way that the actual narrative is constructed, everybody's story that they have is the right story. So there's no sort of canon version of what actually happened in the game. Everybody's version is the correct canon in that timeline of what they've actually created.
We took that, we sort of took that further and actually built in the way the game ends, builds into the game, and the game encourages you to play it again. And the next time you play it, the game will remember you've played it before, and some of the characters will react different to you. And that's, well, I don't want to ruin the story, but basically we sort of tied it into we sort of grounded that in the story as well. So why the characters would act differently. Obviously, we're dealing with time travel, so there's a hint over there. I think we'll get to what didn't work later in this post-mortem, but a lot of that went right over the heads of people, and they played it once and didn't even know there were other endings. So sometimes that's not successful, you know. So, but you know, I think for ourselves, we definitely we achieved what we wanted to achieve, which was a choice and consequence in a linear point-and-click game. And I don't think anyone else has done. There's been, actually, I lied. There's been a couple of other guys who've done it. Unavowed, they did a similar sort of scheme. But it is very difficult to work out. So I think that's why a lot of people don't do it.
We had on our wall a massive sort of like flow chart. It looked like we were crazy people with like balls of yarn that were trying to figure out what would happen if this happened, and if you do this in this different order, how does this actually affect that? And it is definitely a different challenge than making sort of like a straight linear experience.
How about the mini games that the game includes, like besides the multiple endings, which was really fun because you really wonder the other ending too, but also I think the mini games, which in a way you have to overcome to prove yourself, especially for some tribes, you have to really overcome those mini games. So how did the audience find it? Or what was your first thing? Yeah, please.
It was actually one of the very early conversations that Nick and I actually had was the idea of do we want combat in the game, and if we have combat in the game, how would it actually work and what would it actually do? And a lot of our discussions in the early days did revolve around that, and it almost felt like if we've got this very violent world, it felt like a cheat if we didn't have some sort of combat that was actually in it. But I mean, something that I always find quite frustrating in games is I'm sure you've heard the term ludonarrative dissonance, which is where you've got like Nathan Drake who goes and he'll murder in cold blood 30 people, but he'll cry over sort of like, you know, somebody else dying. And it was the idea of we've got these characters, they're these sympathetic characters. How do we keep them sympathetic without turning them into murderous, combat-driven, you know, psychos? So we came up with the idea of having the combat, but sort of firstly combining it into the story. So it became Don's story, and he's obviously he's a war veteran who's suffering from PTSD. So because I'm a sadistic writer, I was like, well, he's going to be the one that goes into combat. And then the idea was to sort of separate that combat out from a lot of the other aspects of the game, but then also bring in the idea of you having to convince these other tribes to actually, you know, if you help them, they will actually help you in these combat arenas. So it was a case of separating the combat out, but also making certain that it still revolves around the narrative experience that we actually had in the game. And it's one of the things that we learned from Star Control 2. When Star Control 2, you go around and you befriend the races, and then you get access to their ships, and then you can use their ships in the combat situation that you actually go into. I think for us also, the fact that it was an adventure game, and it's something that we can go into in terms of our crowdfunding was because we went to Kickstarter, we were supported by people that love adventure games, we couldn't make the combat be too central to the gameplay. We had to design it in such a way that it could be avoided, because adventure gamers, a lot of them don't actually like combat. They don't want a strategic combat experience. They just want a really cool story experience. So it was, in terms of that mini game, it was quite experimental for us, and we purposely did it that you can go through the entire game and you can never sort of like fire a single shot. Like, you don't have to go on that part of the story at all. But if you want to go on that linear part of the story, there's an entire extra branch of narrative that will actually open up for you. And it sort of, mini games and adventure games they can be quite challenging to actually do. I mean, I think we spent a lot of time on the combat, but we used it to our advantage in that all of the characters that we actually had. So I think the game has, like 40 something characters, and I was sort of developing the models and the visual language while I was doing the combat. So we sort of like, we used the characters that were in the combat as the basis for the narrative characters that you actually spoke to. So we could actually maximize our time, at least our sort of artistic input onto that.
Yeah. So one of your questions was, what was the feedback? It was mixed, and I think it's one of the things that possibly hurt the game. A lot of people saw the combat screenshots and the video, and they said, "Oh, it's an RPG with combat elements," and where it's not, and it's difficult to explain that if people haven't played it. And then also you get the RPG players who play that component of the game, and then they want to know, they're like, oh, this hit point's not balanced properly against that AP and it's RNG and whatever the case may be. So they start getting critical of that, where that's not really what the game's about. So I think I think it was important for our part of the story, but it was a learning curve. We learned a lot, and doing cross-genre stuff like that is it's a very difficult sell. People get really angry when they get to that point. Like Chris said, you can avoid that, and the game will totally let you ignore that part of the game. It's not an issue at all. But it is my warning to other indie developers is be very careful about the cross genre stuff. So even if you go to our Steam page now, I took off all the screenshots of that combat because it's such a minor part of the game, and people reacted badly to it. We sort of we didn't want to play that up. So yeah, I think it is supposed to be just a fun mini game. It's not the core part of the game, and it's difficult to sell that in a screenshot or a little gameplay trailer. That's not what the game is. That's just a small part of the game. So yeah, you've got to be careful that your mini games don't become a controversial topic and people just avoid the game altogether.
But I think but I think they really feel a good point in the narrative, because in a way, like during the game, you visit a lot of tribes, different tribes, and those mini games are kind of like rituals. They offer you, in a way, if you want to get something from them, you have to be a part of that ritual. You have to play, because play is also play is also let's say like a part of a ritual. Like it's related with ritual concept. So I think in that sense, it really fills the narrative part.
No, I mean, we wrapped it in the game. We didn't want it to feel as though it was something separate, and it's tightly wrapped into the narrative. But I think it's just because our previous game was purely sort of a simple point-and-click story-based game. I think some people reacted a little bit differently to that component of it. But I think once people actually play it, it's really fun and really easy. And as I said, it can be skipped. So, but yeah, we didn't just add everything in the game because we had to maximize our input, because obviously we were funding this out of our own pocket. Everything in the game is meant to be there for the story. So there's nothing extra in there. We didn't have an extra year just to add extra stuff. Everything is tightly wound and wrapped into the story that we wanted to tell. And so I think Chris, in my document here, it says that we should just talk about the gameplay loop. so initially, when we first started developing the game, we had a lot more linear, where you would almost like Statis, where you'd go from screen to screen. But we kind of realized that we'd much rather have a world map that you can fly around and visit all the various places. And we thought that would give a much more open world feel. And I think that we did achieve that. Some of the criticism has been in the game that you don't know what to do and you feel lost. And we'll talk a little bit about that the latter part of the postmortem. But that's actually, we actually wanted to achieve that as part of what we set out to achieve, which is very reminiscent of games we grew up in the 90s, where you didn't know what the heck to do. And that was part of the charm of those games. They didn't hold your hand all the way through. You literally, some of them you had to buy a hint book or phone a telephone line to find out what to do next. We didn't want to take it that far. All the clues to finish the game are in the game, but we didn't want to hold the player's hand all the way to the end, which I think is another thing that we need to be sensitive to modern gamers, where they really do want to be guided way more than the older school gamers do. Chris, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, when I think back to sort of like my favorite gaming experiences, we're literally being lost in games. If I think of just sort of going back to Star Control 2 as an example, with that over there, you actually got a star map with the game, like an actual physical star map, and you would need that to actually plot your different courses in the game and go to your different planets. And I remember playing it, and I didn't have access to the star map, and I had no idea what to do, and I literally just sort of flew around to random areas for days, just finding my way around. And even like Fallout, you get to a point in Fallout, probably about a third, maybe 2/3 into the game, where you lose direction in where you're actually going. And I think that was something that we really did want to sort of take advantage of. But I think that in terms of the actual sort of structure of the game, when we put it together, something that we learned while developing the game was to be flexible while we're actually putting things together. So everybody has this idea that you get your game design document and it's got sort of like 100 pages and you can refer to page 16 when you're at that point. But the reality of it with any sort of indie development is that it doesn't really work like that. Also, you can get bored very quickly if you're busy sort of like checking boxes. So our idea was to sort of like build a base structure of a gameplay loop, put in the different tribal zones and the different homelands that you can actually visit. And we had a rough idea of what the story would be. And then as we played the game, we actually discovered a lot of the little nuance in the stories and how we actually decided to fly around and the places that we would actually go to. We always had a very strong ending in mind, which I think if you're doing a narrative experience, beginnings are easy, endings are really hard. So when we had the game, we were like, we knew what the ending was going to be. And then we sort of knew what the middle or what the beginning of the story was going to be. And then we allowed ourselves to actually be flexible and agile in our development in figuring out what the middle of the story was, how to get the characters from A to B to C. And I think that was quite important, even just for us in enjoying the discovery of the journey. And we actually almost discovered a lot of the world as we developed the game and as we sort of pushed the narrative forward.
It's pretty much the same way that Chris and I have done all the games, and including the new game we're working on now. We have our structured documents, and we have our story outlines and our character arcs and where they have to hit. But we don't over design. Obviously, just because there's two of us, we don't necessarily. There's actually three of us. We have a full-time modeler, but there's just two of us working directly on the game, and we don't structurally map out everything. We a little bit more fluid in that we'll know what area we need to build. We know what has to happen there. We'll have a few sketches and reference art, and then we'll start. We'll build that area and we'll play it and see if it feels right, and then we'll iterate from that point onwards. And I think that's really important. We then take that further at a later date, and we iterate where we have testers play it out and we work with them. We can't really early access our games because they're linear stories, but we do have play testers that sit in our office and we watch them play, and we build on that. We're reluctant to just spend like 3 months designing every aspect and then knocking that out. I wouldn't enjoy that process. I don't think you would either, Chris.
No. I mean, I can get bored very quickly if I'm sort of just like, ticking boxes. So I like to get something out. And something that we do, which I don't think is something a lot of people do, is I consider every bit of art that I give to Nick final until he tells me that it's not. So I will give him a final piece that I'm happy with, and it can go in the game and it looks awesome. But Nick will come to me and say, okay, fine, but this needs to change. And I think that because I've been a commercial artist for most of my life, like I take criticism of art well enough that I'm not precious about anything. So if something isn't working, like we'll throw it out. And for us, because I work really fast, art is cheap. If I can spend a day on something and it's not working, I can modify that thing in 3 hours to get something that's actually going to work structurally in the game for us. Whereas if you're working with too much structure, you can get lost in the details. And I think that's something that we use to our advantage, the fact we are fast.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit obviously is that Chris is a 3D artist, so anything we need done, he can do. And he's been doing it for like 20 years, so he's really good and really quick. That process might not work for everyone, but I think an ideal indie team is having a programmer and an artist, rather than trying to outsource every art asset. Obviously, if you outsource, then you'll need to, or if you're working on a team of multiple artists, you would have to be very specific in your concept art. But we don't necessarily have that issue, and I think it works for us. Another thing that we do, just on the art side, is that we've actually been developing a large library of art assets. Chris has got a huge selection of things like corridors and flooring panels and that sort of thing, and we do a lot of kit bashing where we take that stuff and we can quickly knock out a scene. We can and relatively simply we can make it look good, and then we save all those assets and reuse them on the next scene. We're not precious about reusing stuff, because obviously there's the reality of this is a business and we have a limited amount of time to produce this game, because we need to sell it so we can move on to the next one so that we can eat for that period of time. So although we would probably love to,
I was just going to ask about your pipeline. So since you're also influenced from, let's say, a lot of movies too, especially Chris. So are you following that kind of a pipeline? Like maybe you have the script, you have a storyboard, and then from the storyboard you like turn them into scenes. So does it work like for you? Huh?
Yeah, I'll just elaborate something that Nick said, and then I'll go to there. Something, because we use a lot of kit bashing, we actually use it to our advantage in Beautiful Desolation, and that we made certain that the world looked like it was constructed out of found objects. So, I have 3D scans of cars that I've done, and I just like rip the doors off and use the door for a wall in some way. And that's sort of like we used our lack of access to a lot of fine details, our advantage in how we actually built the game. In terms of our actual process, it's a hard one because it changes from scene to scene and from part of the game to part of the game. Usually, what I like to do is I'll write quite a little descriptive narrative of what needs to happen, almost like a story. So it almost reads like a paragraph. But if you had to read to someone, they would say, "Oh, wow, that sounds cool." And Nick and I will then talk about that, and I'll be like, "And then the character does this, and the world collapses around them, and they fall off an edge." And then Nick will go, "Okay, well, we can't actually do that. But what if we do this?" And then I'll go and I'll sort of like modify the paragraph to be something that's a bit more realistic. Then from those written descriptions, I generally skip the concept art phase and I just go straight into 3D.
Yeah, we normally use the writing. The writing as the concept phase.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So sometimes you do white box though, bro. You normally white box the scenes in Unity too.
Yeah, so I'll do, and we did it a lot in Desolation. Was building sort of like very, very rough gray modeled white box areas just to make certain that I knew where the entrances were, where the exits were, that the characters could actually fit through certain areas, also how big or how small the spaces were. And that's also because we started working with our modeler Mark. So I would sort of like, have a very, very rough structure, give it to him. He could go in and add the detail. I would then take it, texture it, and put it into our world.
So we actually, Chris, we literally in Unity, because we use Unity, Chris would literally take boxes or objects in Unity, just rough primitives in Unity, map them out, and then Unity, there's a plugin that lets you just dump that all into an FBX. Dump that into an FBX, take it into Max, and then actually model directly on that. So we know that even though we were actually doing it in 3D in Unity, ironically, and then rendering it in 2D, we knew that space would work because it worked in 3D. It'll work in 2D.
So and it's quite a fun process because you sort of get this idea of like you can see everything built up. I've got I love concept art. I've got a massive library of books. I actually went and picked them up from Nick the other day because I've moved into a new office, and I think it was 5 or 6 big boxes of game art books. And I do love them, but I would love to use concept art. But the truth is that, like, again, we don't really have the time, and we don't really need to because I'm the art director. So I sort of like I'll know if something isn't working because I'm doing it. So I think we have a big advantage that we can work directly in 3D. I can put something together. I can hand it over to Nick, and literally an hour later, he'll send me a screenshot of it in the game. And Nick actually does all of our scene assembly. So he does all of the in-game lighting and the particle systems and the fog systems that we actually have. And it's a very collaborative process between the two of us. I'm sure there are indie developers that are watching. Sort of, I see art direction can be honestly one of your most powerful tools that you actually have in your arsenal. And if you look at a lot of games that are out there, that they can look very similar, and I think a lot of people they'll do sort of like I don't like the word asset flip, but they'll sort of go into the stores and they'll just sort of like download the templates and push those out. And I think that if you just spend a bit of time on your lighting and spend a bit of time on your shaders and really sort of like I use a lot of pre-built assets. I love the asset store. I love that sort of thing. But I think it's important to take that stuff and at least try to give it a unique spin and give it something that'll make your work stand out. Even something as simple as converting your work to black and white. Like take your work, put a black and white shader over it. It'll look like Limbo, but at least it's something. Sort of you've got this idea of using art direction to actually give yourself a very unique look. I think that's quite important in sort of like as a developer.
Chris, do you favor a top-down approach for your world building, or I think the last part of the question is, do you favor a single event? Am I right? A single event to tell the story?
Maybe you can ask it again.
I don't know. My microphone is working, but if you can,
I can hear you perfectly now. Yeah.
And now we can hear. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, do you prefer a top-down approach when it comes to world building, or do you prefer to shape your world based around one event, like one small event you choose and then you just shape your world around it? What's your approach?
So my approach with world building is always okay. We structure it this way. When I was first thinking of how to set up a story, I always thought, why can I think of I could think of 20 stories to tell in the Star Wars universe right now. But when I try to think of like my own stories, you tend to flounder. So I like to think I'll definitely go from a very, very top-down event where I think sort of what is the main structure of the world? What is the sort of idea of the religions? What is the idea of how the people got to where they were? And I sort of build almost like a mental map of the kind of space that we're actually in. And then I'll go and I'll literally draw a timeline and I'll say, okay, fine. What happened 10 years ago? What happened 5 years ago? What happened 3 years ago? And then I'll sort of go, what happened 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago? And I'll try to sort of like take my world and kind of then narrow it down almost to a funnel point where I get to that one point where the story actually takes place. So it's sort of it's a bit of both. It's a little bit top down. It's a little bit taking large events and seeing what actually happens with them. And it's very much the idea of like, I try to build Star Wars with every sort of story that I actually do. So Star Wars is based around, Star Wars is a very simple narrative structure. You've got sort of like, space wizards and a light side and a dark side. And that's a really good way to actually start to build story. You have a sort of a central theme, and then you've got the good and the evil. And then I tried to sort of think, okay, how would this have actually affected the world? But my idea is, what is Star Wars going to be in 300 years' time? And that's where I like to actually go. So have a very, very top-down view of the world, and then kind of like in history, go down to a central point where our story will actually take place. It's a very woo way of saying it, but yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for the detailed response.
Fantastic. Thanks for the question.
We were interested in the concept of prototypes.
Okay.
I remember that. Like, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll just take this quickly, Chris. Basically, what we do for a lot of studios that are third party to us is we do concept development with them. So they'll come to us with a game that they want to make, and they'll tell us, and we'll sort of create some benchmark images for them. The game doesn't necessarily react. We'll do some UI, but it's just pie in the sky stuff that will never be made. And so we take the same approach with our stuff. Chris will just come up with an idea, or I'll come up with an idea. We had an idea for a Viking game. We have an idea for an epic space opera game that we were going to put together. Chris will come up with a series of really nice little bits of concept art for that, and then we'll discuss what kind of games, and then I'll try to build something really quickly, almost like game jammy in Unity, and we'll see how it plays, and is this something that we're prepared to invest obviously our time in, but considering we're not employed, it's obviously money in. Are we prepared to invest like $100,000 in this, and do we think that this will sell enough to cover the costs, and will people actually buy it? So it's just basically our own mini internal game jams that we do, but we take them quite far. So Chris is actually going to do some videos on the ones we've done. People will be surprised how we spent like a couple of weeks on each of them before we got to our latest game. We were like, no, we want to revisit Statis. We've got an itch to tell this other story. But so it's basically just prototypes that we put together, and we ask all questions.
Extremely polished prototypes is what we do. So I tried to make the art look as final as possible. The screenshots that we do, I tried to say, what direction the art direction could actually go into. And we really try to polish them to the point where if we saw them, we'd be like, man, that looks awesome.
Yeah, because obviously, normally when people doing those concept brainstorms, illustrations, they're normally quite abstract to what the final game will be. We try to do some kind of representation of what the game could actually be as a screenshot if it was released 5 years from that point. Chris?
I still want to do the Viking game. We actually got quite far with that. We even had sort of characters walking around, and I think in our space game we actually went so far as to actually get some external writers to actually help us sort of flesh out some of the ideas. So it's a lot more than just sort of writing the ideas on paper. And even for Bone Totem, I actually put together a pitch document for Nick, and I put together a really quick prototype in Visionaire of how I imagined the game would actually play. And that was how, Nick still has to sell his ideas to me, and I still have to sell my ideas to him. And that's sort of how we work together. And like I said, every bit of artwork that I produce, I consider to be final until I'm told that it's not. So even like our prototypes that we actually do, I don't know what temp art is. Like I can't do temp art. I have to make something look as awesome as possible as I'm actually putting it together. And we even take that process with our prototypes.
I think it's important for indie developers to do that sort of thing. You don't want to just get stuck in doing you don't want to get stuck into something, because obviously this all takes a long time. So even if it's a year's a long time, but 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 years for a product that is not going to sell. It's going to look terrible, and you're going to hate. So, and it's going to cost you a huge amount of money and bankrupt you. So you've got to be very careful about where you're going to invest your time and money and effort before you've actually done. So I think it's important to do these kind of game jammy kind of prototypes before even showing investors that, just so that you're on the right track with this particular product. It sounds quite straightforward, but a lot of people don't do it. They'll just jump into a game and start making this game. And I think it's they're setting themselves up for failure right at the beginning. And I see it all the time on all the indie game forums and stuff. People do it constantly, and then they hate the game 3 years later, and it doesn't get made. So,
also, I think it's important as an artist to know that you're going to be living inside this world for like 3 years is a long time. 3 years can go from like not having a baby to having a toddler that's sort of like walking around and starting to talk and stuff. Like 3 years, exceptionally long time to be involved in any single piece of art. So you have to make certain that you're passionate about it, that you're going to love doing it. And I find that like setting a benchmark for what you want the game to look like at the end of that process is very important, because then you've always got something to go back to and say, why are we doing this? This is why we're doing this. This is the story we want to tell. This is the game we actually want to put out there. And that's why I like to work in that way, where we set our benchmarks as high as possible and then try to actually hit them. And then I can always go back to that first bit of artwork that I made that inspired us to make the game and say, okay, why did we want to actually do this? Because the truth is that 90% of game development is boring. It really is. Like it's an office job where you're sitting in front of a computer swearing at it. So you have to know why are you willing to actually do this, and what story are you trying to actually tell? And that's why I think our prototype process is important for us in that session, to keep us on track and remind us why we are doing what we're trying to do.
I mean, we're not making it's not even a vertical slice. It's just like a very high level concept stuff that we pitch to ourselves. We pitch the projects to ourselves. If you're not prepared to invest that time and money in that project, then it's very difficult to ask other people to do it, even on crowdfunding or even as an end user. They won't be interested in it. So, I think that's important. Chris, are there any other questions, or do you want to carry on? We're almost at the end of our spiel.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then let's carry on. I was just going to say that since you already mentioned Bone Totem, maybe we can continue with that. But maybe I guess you have some more notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, we could speak for hours on this stuff, but I think just in Beautiful Desolation specifically, it came to about 65,000 words. We had it translated into 5 languages plus English, so 6 languages. That's another talk that we could do, is just budgeting for translation. I mean, translation at its cheapest is 20 euro cents per word. If you work out what it costs, it's you could buy a house for what you spend on translating stuff. Well, and also you might work yourself into a corner. If you do like an RPG with 1 million words, you'll never be able to get it translated because that's too expensive. So we would love to have written 500,000 words for this game. We probably could have, but we wouldn't have been able to afford the translation. So yeah. I was just
going to say that please next time knock on our doors, because the translation is very cheap in Turkey because of the currency.
Yes, we actually we got it. It's in we actually got a Turkish translation. We got really? It at a reduced price. Yeah, it's in Turkish. We got
Is Desolation in Turkish?
Yeah, Desolation.
Places in Turkish.
No, Desolation is in Turkish.
Wow. Well done,
you can hear everyone. You can actually play this game as well.
Yeah. AI Bell Games did it for us. Figs is expensive. Plus Russian it's very expensive translation. So it's an important thing for developers to keep in mind. at the onset of the game development, especially if you're doing a wordy game. You know, if you've got a couple of hundred words or a few thousand strings, that's no problem. But when you start hitting 68,000 words, it starts becoming very, very expensive in the long run to get translated. So that's definitely something. And then obviously, just on what went right, we got Mick Gordon involved. He did Doom, Wolfenstein, Prey, all those cool games, and he just was a fan of our games and wanted to do the soundtrack. So we're like, oh, okay, cool.
Yes, Mick. Thank you, Mick. Yes. Give us all the songs.
And you worked with Mark Morgan, right, for the sounds?
Yes, on Statis. Yeah, on Statis was Mark Morgan. Yeah.
I don't know how we get lucky enough to work with these amazing composers.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Mark Morgan is a very. I mean, he spent like a year and a half on the Stasis soundtrack. It's just like really pedantic and beautiful work, and he's a true musician. And Mick is also excellent guy. Really funny and really nice to work with as well. And they both did like really interesting takes on our world. So we were happy to have them on board. And music and sound is important, and that's a whole other talk as well. But we'll talk about what went wrong. We've got a couple of points here. I said scoping. Scoping is very hard to do for indie developers because obviously you might not be familiar with the amount of time it takes to do things. And it's important to scope that project right in the beginning because time is money. So if you haven't released a game yet, be very careful about how much you want to add to that game because you can take whatever you want to add to the game times by 2, and that's really how much content is required to actually produce the game in the end. Obviously, with experience, you'll know how to scope the game better in terms of what content is required, but it can get quite expensive quickly.
Yeah, I think even with us, like although I mean, Desolation is the game we ended up with is a lot bigger than I thought it was actually going to be. I think that we, if I pitched Desolation, pitched Desolation to us when we first started, I would have been like, "There's no ways you can make this." You know, it's 100 areas, 40-something fully voiced characters, 70,000 words of dialogue. It's a huge game, and I think that the scoping at some point it felt like it got away from us, and I think that we possibly could have told the same story in a slightly tighter scope if we were to sort of like go at it again.
That's just experience. Yeah. Also said what went wrong. I spoke about that. I think I mean, you guys understand you work in Turkey. We're working in South Africa. It's a difficult place to operate a business in. We've got power issues here. I'm not sure what the power grid is like there, but we had rolling blackouts for several years. Still, touch wood, hasn't happened for the last couple of months, but it's been difficult. And then we launched the game in February, and we went into lockdown in March. So that was also it's been a difficult year to actually do anything. But I mean, if we can weather this storm, I'm sure we will be able to do anything on the next project.
We also, in the middle of Desolation, we were also in the worst drought that Cape Town has ever had.
No water, no power. This is ridiculous.
It's a measure where we could flush a toilet because you might run out of water at some point. So it was not an easy few years of development.
That was, I think, a good case. Right, Arturo? I guess we should really remind that to our students. I mean, even they don't have water, even though they don't have power, they continue to develop their game and launch it.
No, we have examples
they worked
to give.
with Mick Gordon. Just a reminder to everyone, they worked with Mick Gordon. I think that's enough of a thing to admire.
Lovely. So obviously after releasing Beautiful Desolation, it sold well, still selling well. It's not selling as well as we want it to be. It's not a smash hit or anything, but it's still selling. It's a difficult game to sell in terms of the marketing aspect. I mean, what is the game? it's not really much I can compare it to. So, but yeah, I think it'll have a long tail. And after we did our prototypes, we decided that we were going to move on to our next game, which is going to be another game in the Stasis universe. And that was Stasis Bone Totem, which we're now in our fully fledged development. We're working on it now full time. And we're hoping to have that done early, not this next year, early the following year, so early 2021. We're giving ourselves a much shorter development time, just a year and a half instead of the 3 years. And because we're using all the technology and stuff and the frameworks and stuff we've built on Desolation, it's been really easy to get the game playable up to a playable point now. So we didn't reinvent the wheel in terms of the isometric stuff. We basically just stripped down the Desolation engine, cleaned it up, and put this new game on top of it, and updated several things that irritated us and just made it better.
I think the demo that we actually put out, I think we developed that in 4 months from talking about it to actually releasing it on Steam, which is pretty fast if you consider sort of.
Anyone can play the demo now. If you go to stasis2.com, you can grab the demo.
I saw that. So. I mean, the Bone Totem was already on. It's still on the Kickstarter somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, and it's already got the pledge, right?
Yeah. We're actually self-funding this one in terms of when I say self crowdfunding, we're not doing it through Kickstarter.
Yes, it's like
Yeah. So we're just funding it. We're in no massive rush to make as much money as possible. Our main sort of goal with the crowdfunding is we just want people to be part of the process. We like having people that we're accountable to. And then the money that we're getting for that, we're going to be rolling into just making the game better. Same thing we did on the other projects as well. And we don't have any hard timeline to end that crowdfunding. Probably be early next year. We'll stop that and we'll carry on. With our other games and the crowdfunding, we did physical rewards, and obviously with physical rewards, you can get way more money. You can start capping on the $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. But the problem is physical rewards are really stressful to get out, and I personally wouldn't recommend any game developer do physical rewards. It cost us a huge amount of money. Also, we had to post it during COVID, so the postage basically ate. Postage was like $5,000 to send out the mail. It was ridiculous. Actually, I lied. It was more than that. So it's very expensive.
Because there's just two of us. We sort of literally sat there with Nick's wife and my wife, and we sat there on weekends like building boxes and putting things into packets and sealing the stuff ourselves. So. I think something as an indie developer is just to remember that like any reward you're going to be putting out there, you're doing it yourself. It's way more time consuming than you think it's going to be. And thankfully, Nick's wife, Crystal, is absolutely amazing. She's been with us involved in our companies for the better part of 15 years. So she's really got a handle on how to actually do things, way more organized than either of us. But it's still, to do physical rewards.
3 months. The physical rewards were 3 months to produce and crazy.
I was just going to ask about the story of.
Chris, you want to start on the story in Bone Totem?
Yeah, I think because this time it's not. I played the demo. So it's not taking place in like deep space. So this time we are like in a way deep sea, probably.
Yes, and we're going under the ocean.
So it's in a way again in a way the environments like make sense. So if it's not a spoiler, can you talk about like how it's connected to the Statis universe? This last game,
So when we decided to do another Stasis, another story, I had this idea for a story that was brewing in my head for a while. And when I told to Nick was like, this would fit really well in the Stasis universe. And our main connection is definitely through the Kane Corporation. I've sort of always viewed Stasis as more of an anthology. So it's just sort of like a collection of horror stories that exist in this world that's kind of got a common thread of this sort of like massive mega corporation and the things that they're actually doing. And I'd love to talk more about the story, but I don't want to spoil it. But definitely, the game takes place after Stasis. There are definitely repercussions from the events in Stasis that have sort of like rippled through the world that have gotten to the point where we are now.
But it's not the same characters. It's different. It's a new set of characters. Yeah.
It's a new set of characters. There will possibly be some like in-jokes and references to other games, but it's a completely unique, self-contained experience in the Stasis world.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to have played Stasis to enjoy this game. It's a new story, new characters, and I think at some point again we might revisit the first Stasis in terms of the character. But I think at the moment Chris had this other really cool story that he wanted to tell, and I think it'll work. I think it's almost like an under the ocean. So we're not in deep space, we're under the ocean, but it's very similar in terms of the way we're telling the story in that, and it'll be a linear game, unlike Beautiful Desolation, but we do have some twists on it because we're crazy and we make our lives difficult. You can actually control 3 characters during the game, and at any point in time you can switch between all 3 characters, and they can all share their inventory with each other, and they each have a separate special skill, and so they pass items backwards and forwards and use the items to help each other in the story and to pass certain areas. So I think we're doing something different from Stasis to keep us also excited about it.
As far as I understand, like he's asking if or are you gonna go back to your previous games and kind of reboot all the events and the characters what has already been so far,
or will you expand the universe,
or you are going to expand the current universe?
As I said, I sort of tend to use sort of Star Wars as my model for storying, and I think I love about Star Wars is that you've got kind of the old Republic. You've got this sort of like new. We won't talk about the new trilogy, but you've got this sort of like the Luke and Vader sort of story, and then you can kind of go into the future there. So I would never want to retcon any of our stories. I definitely love to expand the world and expand the. And even with Desolation, I mean, I've got an idea for the Desolation story that would basically take place about 500 years later. For Stasis, I do have a story to tell about what actually happened to John and what actually happened to Hadley. So at another point, I might go back and tell those stories, but for now, I'm happy to let Sleeping Dogs lie and just focus on...
We're not Star Trek Discovery. We're not going to ruin the universe.
But I guess you are following a structure which is about the Kane Corporation, right? So in a way, it's kind of a junction point for you, like maybe with every story you will. We will open a new page about the Kane Corporation. Maybe just like the Alien series. Like
exactly.
In Alien we have I just forgot the name of the corporation, but
Weyland-Yutani.
Weyland-Yutani,
yeah. Is it a similar thing you are trying to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice to have Kane Corporation as the main sort of like spinal structure to actually hang our story off of. And I think that if we were ever to sort of do another sequel to Stasis, like a direct sequel to Stasis 1, I might want to steer away a little bit from Kane, but much in the same way that I think in Alien Resurrection, they went to sort of like, I think Weyland-Yutani had collapsed and it was the military-industrial complex that had taken over. It would be something along those lines. But I definitely think having this sort of like major central mega corporation, if you're doing a science fiction horror movie, you can't go wrong. Or a horror story, you can't go wrong with like a mega corporation. Like it's just a fun playground to actually play in.
Thanks for all the advices and keep up the good work, because we as Buglift, we are we are trying to be the hub of indies in Istanbul, especially. So we really so we really understand you in so many things. So
Yeah.
stay safe and take care. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you,
very
guys.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Yeah,
Thanks.
bye.
All right.
Take care. Bye bye.